Japanimation Station.
'Hello and welcome to Japanimation Station, an anime podcast brought to you by the folks at the Weekly Stuff Podcast. I am Sean Chapman.
And I'm Jonathan Lack.
And we are here once again to dive into the wild and wacky world of anime. And we are enjoying our Thanksgiving dinner still. It is a long Thanksgiving dinner here on Japanimation Station because we are on our third special Thanksgiving podcast.
Yes, this week we are talking about the Persona 3 movies. Persona 3, phenomenal video game, one of our absolute favorites. 10 years ago this week, the movie adaptation series began coming out in Japan. We reviewed those movies for the Weekly Stuff podcast, our sister podcast at the time when they were coming out. And we wanted to resurface those episodes here on Japanimation Station, give a little new life to them, including remastering the audio to make it sound a little bit more acceptable by our current podcasting standards. We are talking today about Persona 3, the movie number 3, Falling Down, which is either the least creative or the most creative title of these four movies. I've never been able to decide. This was recorded February 16th, 2016. I still think of that as the before times for reasons. You guys know what it is.
Yes.
And in any case, this is a great conversation about a great movie, and this is also the episode where we inaugurated one of our longest-running podcast jokes, which was, why the fuck was Persona 3 Movie 2 the only one on Netflix? You will hear us talk about that at the beginning of this episode, where Sean discovers that, and it's extremely funny.
Yes, it is. It is one of my favorite podcast jokes ever. It's that and Jonathan not buying the bandolier in Red Dead Redemption. Those are the two that live in my memory the best. But yes, these are very special podcasts. I believe, is this the first one where we were not in the condo when we recorded it for these?
I believe this one is in your parents' basement in Golden, yes. And I think the next one is as well.
We watched the movies together because you bought the absurdly expensive Blu-rays. And, you know, this one was obviously not on Netflix, so we couldn't do it that way. So we watched them together, and I remember being, at my old parents' house in Colorado. It just feels like a fucking lifetime ago.
It does. I mean, now, we don't live... These are podcasts recorded when we were both still in Colorado, where neither of us live anymore. So that is part of why the audio has been remastered, to make it sound a little bit more like how we record now and make it a little more acceptable. But yeah, long, it does feel like a lifetime ago, doesn't it?
It does indeed. You know, this is this time to look back and think about, you know, the days of yore. And so I hope you all enjoy this podcast of yore for Persona 3, the movie number 3, Falling Down.
Japanimation Station.
Thanks for listening to Japanimation Station. If you're enjoying the show, please remember to like and subscribe, leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and tell your friends.
You can support the show directly on Ko-fi at the link in the description, and remember to check out the Weekly Stuff Podcast, our long-running series on movies and video games on all platforms.
And now, back to the show. Let's talk about Persona 3, the movie number 3, Falling Down. As always, just go through the Blu-ray set really quick. It's got Ryoji on the cover.
Yes.
Really nice cover image. And we'll talk why in a minute. Like, it makes sense for Ryoji to be the image on this one, even though that's not intuitive if you've played the game.
Yeah.
And as always, comes with a lot of nice stuff. They have the soundtrack and the Blu-ray in one case, which, as always, they have the coolest fucking art on these things. And then it's got the normal postcards where it's got all the posters for the movie, which I always love these because you get little like printouts of those.
Yeah.
You get the booklet. This booklet is particularly cool. Some of the images and stuff in this one, I was flipping through it. It's got storyboards and stuff and lyrics. There's a lot of lyrics in this movie, so it's got all the lyrics for you. And I like that. And then the translation booklet, and I don't have it with me, but they gave you the stickers. So all the stuff you got in the other ones, they're still doing it. You pay a lot of money, but you get a really good, nice box set. So still worth it.
High quality package.
High quality package. And again, I'm probably rubbing salt in the wound because if you didn't get it by now, you're probably never going to because they sell out after pre-order.
Yeah.
Anyway. But yeah, so that's it. But Sean, the movie...
Yes.
Let's recap our thoughts on 1 and 2 really quick.
Okay.
I mean, mostly it's being impressed, but I think really at this point, it's not talking about... I think it's a given that these movies are good.
Yes.
Once we got past number 1, it's like, they did it. They're doing this. It's not that so much as how are they good. And it's really fascinating. So that first movie, we were impressed by Makoto, the main character, because that's really what that movie is about, and finding a way to make what is a silent protagonist in the game somewhat interesting.
Yes.
And they did that fantastically. And then in movie 2, having to do a ton of story that runs a tonal gamut and make it cohesive and show that they can make these movies first and foremost and not just pieces of a puzzle.
Yeah.
And they did that.
Yes.
Movie 2 has a bit of a rough opening, just and there's a lot of exposition. But once it gets off to the races, movie 2 is a punch to the gut.
Yes, without a doubt. I rewatched it earlier today.
Yep.
That editing still hurts.
Yep. And then movie 3 now, we have... I think what is easily the biggest challenge in this series so far. Like, I actually think in some ways number 4 will be the easiest for them to make because it has an ending. It's a clear arc.
It's like because they've left themselves what is like to me the juiciest part of that whole game, which is January.
Yeah.
It's like, and that is like what they have to adapt in the next movie. It's like that is like you said, self-contained. It's like it's a nice meaty chunk of story that has like an incredibly impactful ending. Yeah, like the job is almost done for them.
But the space between movies 2 and movie 4 is so difficult to know what to do with because what happens in that space is, you have the betrayal by Akutsuki, you have the defeating of the final 12 shadows, you have some of the bigger show-offs with Strega, including the death of Chidori, and all those things. But
you have like most of the characters developing their like advanced versions of their personas.
Yes. But that is one of the most heavily, video gamey parts of Persona 3.
Yeah.
Because it's mostly about the day-to-day. It's about your social links. It's about getting to the top of Tartarus. It's about just little cutscenes and things. And it is so shapeless as a story. And in the game, that's not a bad thing because it's part of a larger narrative. And it's fine. And I love that section of the game. It's also where you have Ryoji. And Ryoji is a very weird part of that game. I think it works completely in the game. You could never do it like that in a movie.
No.
Yeah. So with this movie, what they chose to do is kind of turn into the skid, pick this overall theme, which is go on the fallout of Shinji's death in movie 2.
Yeah.
And say, okay, what would that do to the Makoto we have made, who is this broken, disturbed boy? And what would a real death mean to him? And it's, what does life mean if there is death? And that's the question of movie 3. All those story points are still hit, but they're downplayed to the point where this is by far the most off book of the movies.
Yes. Yeah.
They're inventing a lot of material. I think the weight in this is much more skewed towards the small moments and the things that are just there for the movie. And in a way, I don't know if I would call this the best of the 3 movies, but I think it's the most effective. Like, it worked me over really heavily in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's certainly one of the most impressive to me because, as you said, like it would be very easy for this movie to have felt completely aimless. Honestly, like all of the movies could have been like that very easily because that's one of the main things about adapting existing source material like that, especially if you're breaking it up into pieces. I mean, you can look at the Hobbit trilogy for a really bad example, particularly in the last 2 movies of this, where like you're trying to adapt this source material and trying to find ways to make it work in a movie format, but you lose sight of like actually telling a story in doing so, and these movies all 3 of them have been so good about finding a like very specific theme to focus on, attaching that theme in a way to your main character, and then using that as a way to develop all of your cast, and then create like a strong 3-act structure that like ends in a climactic moment that like punctuates the themes of the movie. And all 3 of them have done that like perfectly.
Yes.
In a way that I feel like these movies are not the greatest movies ever made or anything like that, but they are really good movies. And I think if you were someone who was very interested in screenwriting and like the theory of adapting source material, they are really great examples of that, of how like picking out things that are a part of the game but are not necessarily put like under the microscope in the way that these movies do, and finding them and putting them under the microscope and making them like pieces of that story like very explicitly. That's what these movies do, and in some ways they come up with those themes uniquely through their like newly made main character and how like players might react to those themes in the game.
Oh, I am so fascinated in general in my, film scholarship in the theories of like adaptation. And I'm fascinated in the ways good and sometimes bad movie adaptations choose to do an adaptation. And what's fascinating about that, and these would go right to the top of my list as teachable examples, because it's not that these are like better than the game. And there's no way they could be, because the game is a very unique thing and it relies on the gaming medium. But the things they choose to adapt, they generally do better than the game, because they're picking things that the game, by virtue of what it is, can't do in that way. They pick things that they can do cinematically and adapt to that medium and then make them more meaningful than they were in the game. So if the overall experience, it's a different experience. Yeah. It's kind of like if I look at my favorite Harry Potter movies or my favorite parts of Lord of the Rings, where they really take things from the books and do something different with it, and suddenly it becomes this different kind of vibrant work of art, a separate, like not better, not worse than, but just existing as its own thing from the source material. And that's why we do adaptations. Yeah. It's kind of like one of the things I know always take shit for is that I'm not a fan of The Shawshank Redemption, that movie. Oh, yeah. And that is because the way they taught that to us in film school, I didn't see that until film school. And the way they taught it was, go read the Stephen King book and then come watch the movie. And so the day of that, it's like a 200-page Stephen King book. So I read the whole thing and then went to watch the movie. And I think it's the best thing Stephen King's ever written. I think it's a phenomenal novella. If you've never read it, I know you're not a huge Stephen King fan. Yeah. You should read that, because that is fucking brilliant. And it's like tight 200 pages. Yeah. It's really a novella. It's in fact collected in with other stories, so that you can still have an 800-page Stephen King book. Yeah. But then I went to see the movie, and the movie is just the book beat for beat, but with all the rough edges sanded off. And it disappointed me, because it's like, I'm not getting anything more, and where the book really hit me, I'm actually getting less. So I recognize that it's a good movie, it's a well-made movie, it's a well-acted movie. It did nothing for me because I'd read the book, and as a work of adaptation, I think it's really lackluster. And so that's what I'm saying. Like, that's kind of one of those things about adaptation that is fascinating, is it's not as easy as just doing what you had accurately. And these Persona movies are such great examples of that. Because if you really think about it, many of the things we love in the games, obviously it's not here, and it can't be. But there are things that they pick up on that I would, if I were set out to, write these movies, I would never pick up on it. That could be the crux of it. And I think the key for me here is Ryoji in this movie. Because Ryoji is a plot device in the game. Yeah. And he's there to be kind of a mystery, to have to further Aigus's plot, if anything. Yeah. And to just work you towards this revelation that the movie actually doesn't even get to this time. That he is the harbinger of death, and you have to make a choice related to him, and you can do something really gruesome. Yeah, you get the bad ending. Yeah. The real bad ending. Yes. I like that it would have been hilarious if this movie went up to that point and like had two different endings that you could watch. Oh yeah, that'd be great. They made two different movie number 4s. Yes. Be great. Movie number 4, number 2 is really short. Yeah. It's just the cutscene from the game. Yeah. Anyway, no. Because what they've done with Ryoji is made him into a symbol this time of what the theme of the movie is, which is enjoying life for what it means and what it gives us. And they've made this decision where in the game it's just weird boy. What's his actual name? What? The weird boy who'd visit you at your dreams. And Pharos? Pharos, yeah. Yeah. They just named him Weird Boy for the first half of that game, right? That's probably, I don't remember. Okay, anyway. Pharos, and Pharos makes a conscious decision that he sees Makoto as suffering, and he decides, I'm going to go become Ryoji, basically. Yeah. And I'm going to come down to the human plane, which is very different than in the game, where Pharos does not come to this awakening. He just disappears, sort of. Yeah. And then Ryoji enters the movie just as you think, and I was thinking this, oh God, is this movie just going to be a 90-minute wallow? That could work, but I don't think that's Persona at that point. Yeah. Because Persona is never a wallow in anything. Yeah. It's very varied and dynamic. And once Ryoji enters, and he is basically just his mission in his brief existence is just to have fun and get other people to be happy, primarily Makoto, the movie takes off in a way where there's nothing really flashy in this one. There's not a lot of fighting. The visuals are fantastic, but there's not as many moments to show off. Yeah, like you don't have as much like
of the really sort of surreal dark hour
Yeah.
moments, you know?
Yeah, but again, I felt myself being worked over because it's really funny. I think it's the funniest of the three movies. And yet each of those funny moments has a poignancy that just hits you in the gut because what it's about is the transience of life and enjoying things in the moment. And all these things that the game, it's more about the experiential aspect about that, so they're not telling you it, whereas the movie can do this in a more cinematic way where they really want you to feel that as a theme. And it really hit me, and just being a fan of the game, it's like, yeah, it's almost like a great essay on the game while being a good adaptation of the game.
That's a really good way of putting it. That it is like, it feels like it is an interpretation of the game's story in a lot of ways. And that like, and it is the way that they build out Yuki as the main character that like, and I think they've done such a good job of basing sort of the themes of each of the movies around him. And that was like in the first movie, it was about him sort of learning to care about himself and to care about life in any way because he was so empty. In the second movie, it was about him sort of having to learn like the actual importance of these relationships and like having to like learn faith and trust in people, and that like he was so caught up in the idea of like his life fighting these shadows that's like he forgot about what's actually important about like that he didn't enjoy fighting the shadows, he enjoyed the relationships that he had, and he had those relationships as a virtue of his position as a part of this team. But just because the team goes away does not mean that those bonds go away. And it's like, and he has to learn that lesson really hard in that second movie, and it bites him in the ass. And so then this third movie, what I think is really fascinating about it is that you see him trying to go back to who he was at the beginning of the first movie and not being able to do it. And it like, that's like, it's impossible for him to go back into like build that shell again and to not care anymore. And as much as he tries to sort of pretend, that's not possible. Like he's made these bonds and he can't hide from it anymore.
Yeah, and it's like Ryoji is almost like this guardian angel. It's like It's a Wonderful Life. He sees Makoto suffering and comes down. And I love his intro in this movie where Makoto goes out one night and Ryoji is just sitting on top of the train station and like jumps down with his big fucking scarf.
Yeah.
And it's really cool.
The animators have a lot of fun with his big scarf in this movie.
Yes. But it's pretty poignant, all of that stuff, because, as you say, it's Makoto trying to be the person he was, and by virtue of not being able to, the amount of change that has happened in the series really hits you hard.
Yeah.
And sets you up for what is going to be an absolutely emotionally devastating final film.
Yeah, because there's also, like, there's a weird, like, second layer to watching this movie where you're like, yeah, no, like, everyone should be, like, trying to get Makoto to sort of come out of his shell again and, like, to, like, learn how to live life and to spend time with his friends. It's like, I believe all of that, but then back of the head is like, but I know where all this goes. Like, I know how this ends. I know that, like, hey, you're, like, signing his fucking death warrant because it's only through having these bonds is he able to make the decision at the end, ultimately, that he's going to have to sacrifice himself. So it's really fucking dark.
But again, on that level where it is an interpretation of the game, is that I feel like these movies so heavily rely on you having played the game, not to fill in the plot. These movies have proven that I think you could watch these cold and you wouldn't be confused.
Yeah.
But where it is thematically is that, because the flip side of that, Sean, what you said is totally true, but the flip side is that he also dies in peace because of it.
That's true.
He does not have regrets, and he goes to his death in a way where he's not afraid of it anymore. And that's the beauty of that ending to me. And that's kind of where we're headed, I think. It's this acceptance of it all. And I think you're supposed to be thinking of both sides of that coin this entire movie.
Yeah.
And if you're not, I think the movie would still be fun and good and a rich experience, but it is so rich because it is a dialogue between people who are intimate with the material and seeing it in this new light. Yeah. And I can't think of any analog for that, honestly.
No, me neither.
Because most, movie adaptations, they're for both audiences. They're telling a story, and if you've seen it before, great, and if you haven't, that's okay too. But it's not made more for one or the other, if it's good. But this is made for people who have, but not as a failure. Usually if it's like, this is made more for the fans, that's because it hasn't been done well, frankly. Yeah. That's not the case here. Yeah,
no, I agree. It's something where it's like, man, I'm just trying to think of like all the choices that they have to make in this movie on like how you adapt these materials, how you have to write this main character. And it's like, man, did they go like the tough route too? Because it's like, I've seen this theme is not uncommon. It's particularly not uncommon in anime, where you have a lot of very brooding protagonists, where you have like the whole, I'm not going to try to get close to people because if I do, when they get hurt or when they die, when I lose them, it will hurt even more for me. Like, that's not an uncommon theme. But I feel like there's a brutality to that theme that most things don't take the next step that this movie does in like two ways, like in two basically scenes of like that, like, yes, like you shouldn't you use that as an excuse to retreat into yourself and to escape from life. But at the same time, hey man, it's still going to fucking hurt.
Yes.
Like, hey man, these people are still going to die. Like, hey, people are still going to betray you. Like, that's not going to stop happening just because you came out of your shell. And I feel like the most times I see this theme tried to like kind of tackled, they always stop before it's ever going to get to that point again. Whereas here, it's like, you have all of that, and then you also have Chidori dying, which is like, there's a lot of like sort of self-fulfillment in that, and you know, like Junpei says at the end of the movie that he's glad that he met her, and he's still glad that he fell in love with her, but at the same time, like, it still fucking hurts.
The last shot of Junpei in the movie is him standing alone in the stairwell.
Yeah, and like pocketing the heirloom that he bought for her when
That
he was
he'll never get to give
yeah,
her.
that he'll never be able to get to give her. And then at the very end of the movie, you get that scene where Makoto's like, hey, like, Ryoji, I accept your friendship. Like, I accept these relationships. I'm willing to, like, care again. And then, like, 5 minutes later, it's, oh, the other shoe drops. And, hey, this is not going to work out well. And that's where the movie stops.
Yeah, and the ending is the hardest part for me to figure out my feelings on, because this movie really doesn't have an ending. Or like a concrete plot one. And movies 1 and 2 do. Like, there is a clear climax and ending.
Yeah.
And it's not like the story is over, but you can put it away and then go for another couple months without seeing it, and it's fine.
Yeah.
This one is a cliffhanger. But I think it's thematically very appropriate, because you could very easily, and I don't think it would hurt the movie, go to the next step and do the exposition dump that you get there, but that they end on the evocative note of, oh shit, not only is Ryoji not who you thought he was, but he's this person and he's just fucked up Aigis.
Yeah.
And so everything goes to shit, and it just let it be provocative and let it hang. Perfect.
Yeah.
It's really perfect. The more I think about it, it's like, yes, that's how it has to end.
I mean, it's like the second, like I'm so fresh off the second movie too. The second movie ends with them at the funeral. I guess it's not technically the funeral, but they're at the school, like at like that assembly or whatever. And the last shot of the movie is just hanging on Makoto's face as he's staring at the portrait of Shinji that's up on the stage. And it's like, and that's the last shot. It's just his like pale face, and that's it. And this has like a similar thing.
Yeah.
Where it's just, it kind of stops right when it needs to stop.
It's the evocative ending, not the literal ending, and I like that.
It doesn't tie everything up because it can't, because it's a chain and a link, you know.
Yeah.
And it tells the story that it needs to tell in terms of it completing the ideas of its theme, in that the fourth movie does not have to be about what the third movie is about, in the way that the third movie is not about what the second movie is about or the first movie is about. All three of them have really clear, distinct themes and ideas playing through, while the like overall plot of the game is slowly marching forward towards the inevitable climax.
Yes.
So it's like, yeah, it can't have like the distinct sort of literal plot exposition-y kind of ending where it's like, well, things are wrapped up and it's over, because it's not over. But it does get to end on the sort of like closing argument about the theme of the movie, which is what it needs to be. It's why these work so well as standalone films, even while they are adapting a larger overall story.
Yeah. So smart. Just I turn to you halfway through the movie like, this is really good, and I'm amazed because I keep waiting for them to fuck it up somehow.
Yeah.
And not that I expect them to, but there are so many points where you could. That's all I mean.
Yeah.
And this movie in particular, I mean, this movie is basically built on stuff that I honestly kind of thought might just get cut. Mm-hmm. You know? It's kind of funny to me that the biggest scene in this movie in the game, which is the Akutsuki betrayal, I think is the weakest scene in this movie.
I think so too. It feels like it's sort of there because it needs to be there, and it's sort of like,
yeah,
it just has a really awkward placing in terms of how they decided to organize the movies.
Because when I first heard they were going to do this as a project, I expected that to be the end of one of the movies.
Yeah, me too.
And I think clearly once you get to the end of film 2, they could have done it that way, but it would have been really awkward because there's just not that much space in between there. Mm-hmm. They could have moved things around or something. But so it's the beginning of a movie, and then, well, what do you have? You have Ryoji, and you have this trip to Kyoto, and you have Chidori, and these are all things that could have been cut or altered, and you wouldn't blame them for it.
Yeah.
Because they're not incidental to the game, but they're part of, like I said, it's like a part of just a larger, again, it's a 60-hour game. This is going to be a 6-hour series when done. Most of it's getting cut.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't blame them for wanting to cut those things, and instead they take these things that really could be hard to know what to do with in the larger story and say, let's make these the pillars of a bigger thematic purpose.
Yeah.
And so Chidori and Junpei's relationship becomes a key pillar of this, and the trip to Kyoto becomes the key moment of healing and of humor, and all the stuff with Ryoji becomes this key element of Makoto's character development, and then the stuff with Akutsuki becomes the kickoff point to that, where they're kicked as low as they can be,
yeah,
and then they have to find a way to pick themselves up, and the way they pick themselves up is through each other. And so in the most unexpected place, they find this grace that is unexpected for fans of the game because that's not the theme of the game at that point.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's something where because you also have like a bunch of these, what are to me like really iconic scenes from the game, like several of them where you have like Akihiko alone at Shinji's funeral, like talking to him and like basically talking to himself. You have the conversation between Yukari and Kirijo. You have, I can't remember what the third one was going to be, but like you have
Fuka on the roof with
Fuka on the roof, yeah. Like you have, you have these like and you have Junpei and Chidori and like Chidori dying and like all the parts of those. Like you have all those scenes that are like really important, sort of big moments on their own in the story. That like you said, like some of those could be cut or like rearranged. But what's really fascinating about how this movie handles it is it takes all these scenes that I remember really distinctly from the game and adapting them more or less straight. Like it's not like literally the exact same scenes, but they're like really similar. But the scenes feel very different because they're juxtaposed in very different ways. I mean, like the Akihiko one is in a totally different spot because that would be at the very end of movie number 2.
And it would be out of place.
Yeah, it would be like if you were doing it chronologically, like that would be at the beginning of movie number 3 would be the scene with Akihiko, but they make it this flashback when he's having a conversation with Yuki. And that's so smart how they keep these like really critical scenes for these other for all the supporting characters because they all have those moments in the latter part of the game. And keeping those, but recontextualizing them to be used in the overall theme of the movie and like how it's attached to the theme of the main character and what the main character's journey is. And it's like that is incredible to me that it's like you didn't cut anything. You've just recontextualized all of it with your own sort of story and your own energy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it just the moment where I realized this movie was taking off for me is when Ryoji comes up to Makoto has this very funny encounter with Tanaka from Tanaka's Amazing Commodities, where they work in a cameo by both Tanaka and the little girl at the
Maiko, I think her name is.
Maiko from the playground. And I like that they still do the little references to the social links.
Yeah.
And
although every time I see is that Kenji's his name, your classmate in the background, I'm like, is he still trying to hook up with his teacher? Is that story still going on and we just don't see it? Because that's the weirdest social link in any of these games. It's him trying to be in a relationship with this goddamn teacher.
It's so good.
Yeah.
Love that one. Anyway, but so you have that scene, and then as a result of a series of events, Makoto owes money to Tanaka, so he has to go make some money. And really, I think the implication is he's just trying to numb himself. I don't think he really cares about making the money.
Yeah.
Like, I think if he were in a better place mentally, he would just walk away from Tanaka and forget about it.
Or just fucking kill him right there, man. He's got a persona. I can summon fire from on high, bitch. You don't talk to me like that.
Fire, you can get Jack Frost out there and laugh at Tanaka.
Yo ho ho, bitch. I'm gonna have a little walk with Jack Frost, that's what I'm saying.
All right, so he doesn't do that, and he has to make some money, so he goes to the coffee shop where you go in the game to get your pheromone coffee and all that, and he gets a job there, and then Ryoji comes in and gets a job too, so just he can hang out with Makoto and try to cheer him up. And then he also starts this business at school with Makoto where they go around and do help for people, and they help people.
Little, like, odd jobs.
And at this point, they're totally off the range. This is not in the game at all. And
I mean, it couldn't even be in the game. Like, they wouldn't have worked, like, mechanically.
No. And so this is all new, but you're like, this is really, funny. They have found a way to inject humor into this movie, and at that point in the movie, I thought they weren't going to be able to do it. I'm like, where do they get the jokes? Because they have to have some of it. Persona is funny, and that's one of the things about it, is that it recognizes life has highs and lows.
Yeah.
And it gives you those lows, but it also gives you those highs. It gives funny as good
it's
as
like
it gives sad.
Nanako, as a character, is like emblematic of that she like gives you like some of the funniest, lightest moments in the game in Persona 4, and the single darkest moment in the entirety of Persona 4.
Yeah, and if you win a whole Persona movie and it was just dark, that wouldn't feel right. Maybe they can do it with number 4, that's okay.
Yeah.
But if you did it with number 3, it would just be a little bit of a slog. And instead, it's really funny, but not sacrificing the poignancy, and it's very smart. And that's the point where I realized, okay, not only do they get this, they are reaching for something, and they have an ambition here that goes beyond just solid adaptation. It really is, as you say, an interpretation, and a very smart one. And all of that, I had a smile on my face, and also a twist in my chest. Because it's not only that it has like these really funny moments that are really funny and these lighter moments, but it's like it knows how to like deploy them tactically. That it uses it
because it's so germane to the theme that like the whole idea is that like, yeah, there's some super fucking dark shit about life, and like life can be really fucked up, and these movies are not afraid of showing those parts. But like the whole point of the movie is everyone basically trying to convince Yuki that like that's not the only thing that life has, because obviously that's not the only thing that life has. And if you ignore all the great, funny, weird stuff and all the fun you can have hanging out with your friends and the wacky antics that ensue and seeing like the bright side of life, like what point is there anymore? And so it is what makes that like Kyoto trip that is sort of like felt like it's a fun part of the game, but kind of an aimless part of the game. I think you used that word. It's like I totally agree with that. And here it feels so powerful and integral that it's like, because it's such a cathartic trip, and it was mostly in the game a cathartic trip for Kirijo and Misuru and Yukari. But here it's just like a cathartic trip for the entire movie, because like everyone has these like issues like underneath that are still still boiling and bubbling, and just going on this trip and just getting to be like crazy and wacky and get up to all this like fucking bullshit. It makes you sort of appreciate the themes and like that other side of it, which then makes it all the harder once you go into it. It's like, oh yeah, but then all the bad shit's gonna happen now. This all goes south from here.
Well, and coming back from that trip and having the Chidori scene, which is as hard hitting in the movie as it is in the game.
Yeah,
arguably harder hitting in the movie because of how they've pinpointed that.
Yeah,
and. Yeah, I don't think we're going to have the forced resurrection scene from Fess in this version.
Yeah, I'm really glad because that's like it's not the canonical version of how that goes. No. Like Persona 4, the Ultimax Ultra Suplex hold basically confirms that like he's going off of that she dies in Persona 3, because that's a part of Junpei's story there. So yeah, I didn't think that they were going to. I'm really glad they didn't, because that was a stupid part that they added to Fess.
Yeah.
So it's like the only thing about Fess that like makes it a like weak version of that game in any way.
Yeah. So anyway, all good. Let's talk about specific moments.
Okay.
The version of the hot spring scene in this movie is fucking phenomenal. Because Persona does their hot spring scenes because it's an anime standby. All anime has to have a scene where boys get in a hot spring and they're looking at girls and they shouldn't be, and they didn't mean to be there, and it's a fuck up.
Yeah, it's just a massive misunderstanding, but something's going to happen. It's a tradition.
Yes.
It needs to happen.
And Persona does it well, but this is by far the best version ever done.
Yeah.
And at least in Persona, I don't mean like in all of anime, I don't know. I have not seen all anime.
No.
But
because all anime has it, either symbolically or thematically, in some way it's in there.
Yeah. But anyway, if you read between the lines, I'm sure like Nausicaa has it somewhere too.
Yes.
That's
the entirety of the movie, really.
Yeah.
Like it's all just one big hot spring, man.
Yeah, well, that's
the
where
Earth is a hot spring.
That's where the boy, like Nausicaa's friend, kind of finds her when she crashes, and they're in like the Sea of Decay version of a hot spring.
Exactly.
There you go. No, anyway, but if you haven't seen Persona 3, the movie number 3, the way they do it is, I mean, they have it. It's very well animated and all this, but it's their choice of music when it happens, where they're trying to get out. Junpei realizes he doesn't have his towel, so he can't run away with them, and they start playing. Naked. They start playing the sad music from the end of movie number 1, where they're all about to die, and Makoto's like, "I can't leave you behind, Junpei," and he's like, "I've reached the end of the road. You go without me."
It's like they're just like, it's like the super dramatic scene you've seen in everything where like someone has to be left behind, and this is kind of like one of the best versions of that scene I've ever done, because they go so completely melodramatic for it. It's like I kind of got like emotionally worked up.
Yes,
like because they're all like, "No, we can't." It's like, "You've got to go without me. We can't leave you behind." It's like, we all promised we'd survive this.
What's funny is they go completely straight-faced in the music, in the staging, in the animation, everything, but you know how fundamentally silly it is.
Yeah.
And it's so great, because they kind of do something a little like that in the game, but not that far.
Yeah.
And so the version of the movie is just phenomenal.
Yeah, it's really great. And then earlier they have that moment where Aigis like shows up like outside the window of the room in mass destruction. It's the second time, because in movie number 2, they have a similar sort of scene with Aigis where mass destruction plays comedically. It's like they are getting way more comedic value out of the mass destruction song than I thought was. I didn't think that there would be one scene that did that. There's been 2, and they're both hilarious.
Well, the scene with Aigis leads to probably my favorite moment of the movie, where they have this big thing where Aigis wants to, it's really funny, where Aigis wants to switch rooms, like, Ryoji, you go to the girls' room, and I'll stay here, and Aigis being a robot doesn't get what's a problem with that, and Ryoji being a horn dog doesn't get that, and so they're all trying to climb out, and then they wind up breaking the balcony, falling into the water, and then Makoto, for the first time in the movie, just breaks out laughing.
Like, practically for the first time in, like, the series, like, I don't know if he's ever laughed. Really.
Yeah. That hit me.
Yeah.
Good God. That was a blow in like the most, I had a huge smile, and then also just your heart constricts in that moment.
Yeah.
It is so powerful and so perfect. And just this, it's like the air is let out of the movie in this, not in a bad way though, like in this great, like the movie opens up to new emotional horizons at that moment. And it's just so great.
Yeah, because again, it's a scene that I have seen, I feel like I said the word scene like 5 times. I've seen scenes like that before in other stuff. Like, it's not an uncommon idea, but I don't think I've ever seen that scene work that well. Like, I've always understood the idea of it, but I feel like it's so rare to get it executed, because I feel like it requires such a delicate balance of tone to really pull off. Like, you need something that has this really fundamental, like, somber melancholy to it, that, like, where you have that real relief from when the humor does come in, that makes it so that when Makoto laughs there, he's really laughing there. It's like there's a really infamous scene from Final Fantasy X that, like, you can find this everywhere because the dubbing of it is really awkward. And this is why it's so famous, is because it's this really forced laugh scene. And it's like, if this is like that scene from Final Fantasy X where Titus and what's her face have
Tifa?
like laugh together.
No, that's from Final Fantasy VII.
I can't remember. Yuna, I think her name is.
Okay.
It's like they laugh on this dock, and the dub is really bad, and so it's a very infamous scene. But it's also just like a really awkward scene in Japanese. Like, it's just like, it's this scene but done really poorly. And so I've always sort of like had that idea that there's like, you just can't really pull it off. Like, it's too hard. Like, I get the idea of like the tortured protagonist like finally having this brief moment of levity and having this true laugh that's like naturally comes out, but it never really worked for me. And here, like, it really hit me hard.
Yeah, again, it's a movie that just knows what it's doing at every turn.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to talk about Aigis for a second.
Okay, yes.
Aigis is really funny in this movie.
She is, yeah.
And I maybe have bigger concerns about how much Aigis we're getting, and we can talk about that. But what I love, because I've only heard Aigis in English, before watching these movies. And in Japanese, I love how she talks about Ryoji, because the first time she sees Ryoji, she just says, "Anata wa dame desu." Yeah. And if you don't speak Japanese, the translation doesn't do it justice. Yeah. That is a ridiculously harsh thing to say about someone.
Yeah, she just says repeatedly over and over again. Yeah. It's like, because they say "you are no good" is how they translate it, and that's the proper translation. But I feel like
dame is so harsh.
But it's like, but it is the appropriate translation, because it's like, you normally think like, "Oh, you're no good." Like, in English, we make that phrase really light. It's like, no, you are no good. Like, good, null. That's what it's a good equals 0. That's what that phrase means. Yeah, and she just says it over and over again.
Yeah.
Her presence in this movie is hilarious, but also is like, again, knowing what's to come and knowing why she reacts to Ryoji that way already, it does make it all tragic even while it's funny.
Also, I realize I love Aigis too, because with my limited understanding of Japanese, she speaks so robotically, I can understand all of it.
Yeah.
I don't need subtitles for Aigis, and I love that.
Yeah,
it's funny.
She speaks in simple, short phrases. Yeah.
It's like, I know all these words. I can't do that for like Ryoji or someone. Yeah. But anyway, no, Aigis is funny. I do wonder, I don't think Aigis has been underserved, but it's just clearly she is functioning as a slightly different character in the movies than she is in the game. And I wonder how the impact will feel, where she's more part of an ensemble here, where I think in the game she's maybe first among equals in a lot of ways.
Although I don't think she necessarily takes that place so much until January. Like, she has, I think, a little bit more, because she's the most sort of colorful character in the game, because she's a robot, and like, she has like a lot of tragic stuff about her, and she's like the funniest character in the game as well. But like, I mean, you don't get that social link with her until the last month of the game. Yes. It's not until the very end. And here, I think you do get, like, I think they're very smart about how they're using her, in the sense that, like, they're using her only, like, usually to either, like, as, like, to deliver a bit of a joke a lot of the times, but also to really develop her attachment to Yuki. In particular, you have the scene where, like, she's kind of like all fucked up after all the stuff that's happened, and she like finds him when he's out on the street and he hugs her. Like that whole scene was heartbreaking. I thought
it's
that
great.
Really, because they have like a line in there that's not in the game. That's she says like, maybe this is the reason why I have like this eternity of life is so that I never have to leave you.
Yeah.
That's like, because that's gonna fucking
That's a beautiful.
that's gonna turn around on her really hard with the when Kimi no Kyoku plays at the end of this fucking series.
Yeah, it's amazing. I do think I love every scene they've done with Aigis. I think it's all brilliant. I'm just saying I wonder how it'll turn out in the last one, and I'm just saying I think that's the challenge next time.
Yeah.
Each of these movies has had a challenge. I think she's the challenge in the last movie.
But I think that's I think like we said at the top of this discussion, the challenge is sort of set up for them like right in front of them. That it's like this is the movie about him and Aigis. Like because that's also already like in the game, because that part of the game is structured a lot more like how these movies are, where it does feel like it is pinpointing on this idea and this theme, and this relationship between these two characters is completely about that. So it's like they're set up, I think, to really succeed for the next movie.
Oh, I think so. I'm just saying because they haven't failed in any of these challenges. I'm just saying that's the challenge.
But you are right; she hasn't had a huge prominence in these movies.
It's just that Aigis depends a little more, even than the other characters, on the fact that in Persona you go around, you talk to everyone, you get to know them. It's the kind of thing the movie can't recreate.
Yeah,
I'm not saying they can't make it work. It's just it's the challenge. I think that's the thing is these movies are at their best when they have to overcome those challenges.
Yeah.
So I think the next one will be really fascinating to see how they do that, because there are moments from that social link that are so fucking powerful that I do think they could adapt pretty straight in this if they do it that way, and we'll see. I wonder how long it's out in Japan. I guess I could check, but I feel like that one could stand to be even longer than the 90 minutes the rest of them have been. Because it's going to be really interesting. What's amazing to me about these movies is that they've kept all the big important pillars of the game. They're all in there.
Yeah,
like none of them they haven't just knocked down any of those. Like I could imagine a Persona 3 adaptation without Strega.
Oh yeah, absolutely,
easily.
Yeah,
but they haven't chosen to go that route, and it's been the right choice. They do make the tapestry richer.
Yeah, and then you do get like, I am so excited because like I'm just really excited for the last movie for two things. I really want to see all the Aigis stuff because it's my favorite part of the game. I also am really excited about seeing some of the material that Takaya has, like because that character is so fucking just menacing and malicious and just pure evil. He's so great, and the English dub version of him is amazing. I really like the Japanese version of him as well. Like he's
got this really deep voice.
He's not in this movie as much as he is in number 2, but like every scene that he's in, it's like, fuck, this guy is evil. Like, oh my god, he's a great villain.
He's great, and the stuff in Persona 3 is fascinating because I've never seen something like Takaya where they do humanize him. Like that is the arc in January for Takaya, is he is humanized, but he doesn't become less evil. No, that's what's fascinating. Is usually you get sympathy. I don't think you get sympathy, but you do get empathy, and if anything, it makes him more terrifying.
Yeah, that like you understand who he is, and like you realize that like he's not just insane. Like it's like no, there's something to this guy. He's still really fucking evil, but there's something to him.
Yeah, it's really scary. It'll be fun to see that. I liked that Jin used his grenades in this movie. And when you think about that in the game, it's one of the most ridiculous things in the game. He's just throwing fucking grenades out.
Yeah.
And in this, it actually becomes like a thing where, Aigis has to like shoot them down and then she gets blasted back. And you're like, oh, right, this dude's fucking throwing grenades out there.
Yeah, I caught that too as a fun like something that I didn't necessarily expect they'd keep from the games, but I'm glad they did.
If you haven't played the game or you don't remember, he's like when you're fighting him, he's just like tossing a grenade in his palm.
Yeah, because that's his like it's like how like your character has like a sword and Shinji has an axe and stuff like that. Yeah. And Akihiko just punches people because he's really cool. Yeah, Jin just chucks fucking hand grenades at people. I have no idea where he got them because this is supposedly it's set in Japan where like gun restrictions are way harsher in Japan than they are in America. I think it's probably kind of hard to find a hand grenade even in America. I can't imagine how hard it would be to get your hands on a fucking grenade in Japan.
Yeah. No, it's great. I want to talk about Mitsuru.
Okay.
Because I think she's been the character most underserved of the main cast in the movie so far.
Yeah.
And I think this movie doesn't completely reverse that. I still think she'll be the one in this series the most kind of marginalized just by necessity of the story.
Yeah.
But I think this movie took some very necessary steps to make her feel more integral. Yeah. And all of her material is great. And I think particularly the scene, which is the Persona Evolution scene from the game, where she and Yukari have this conversation on the Kyoto trip, which that is the best scene in the Kyoto trip in the game.
Yeah.
And
I mean, it's the reason why the Kyoto trip exists
Yes.
in the game, basically.
Yeah, that scene is done phenomenally here, and it is the most visually arresting scene
Yeah.
in the movie. And I think it might be the most visually arresting scene not done in the Dark Hour in this series.
Yeah.
Because even the one in the second movie where they're out on the lake of like blood, that is during the Dark Hour, where Yukari and
Although you do
talk.
have, since I just watched movie number 2, you do have a couple of moments. Particularly, it's when Yuki first meets Aigis, and they're both standing on that dock. And
Oh,
they're
that's
like
fantastic.
on opposite sides of the frame, and it's like you just get like just sky blue. Like that's really beautiful.
Yeah. But the one here, it's where it's sunset and the water is orange and it looks
Yeah.
otherworldly even though it isn't.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. And I should say about the animation in this movie, I mean, we've gone on at length about how good it is.
Yeah.
This movie has less of the Dark Hour stuff, but I still think there are no easy compositions. It's one of the things I love about these. Every composition, pound for pound, shot for shot, they never take the easy, let's just do a standard, 2-shot or something.
Yeah.
It's always interesting and thoughtful and oftentimes just bizarre in some way. And I love it. It really is the Persona 3 cutscenes took to the nth degree.
Yeah, and there's something that's actually kind of relaxing about this movie for like basically most of like the big middle chunk having no Dark Hour stuff at all. There's something I finally kind of like about that there's it feels like it because so much about the themes of the movie are about going back to everyday life in different ways and sort of finding meaning back in that stuff, and it needs to be more normal. And so it's like, like you said, they do find ways to make that really visually arresting in different ways. And it's nice to see that sort of the more natural aesthetic come back and not always being in like the just like really crazy Dark Hour stuff.
Yeah. No, it's fantastic. And it's nice to see that they have both kept these movies coming out relatively like clockwork. I think the delay between 2 and 3 was the biggest, but 4 is out now, so it's done. They've made the series. And there's never been compromises. Like, it's still, these can't be that big budget, but the animation looks big budget.
Yeah.
It looks phenomenal. Like, it's tough for me to point to other anime movies, especially on this scale, where they're not like a Ghibli or something where they're a big movie. This is still a game adaptation.
Yeah.
And yet, it can punch with the best of them. It's really good visually.
Yeah. The animation is spectacular. And as you said, like we've talked about that a lot on the discussions for the last 2 movies. But
And I think we'll have a lot more to say probably with the 4th one.
yeah. Man, and then it's like, but then also I feel like we're kind of wrapping this up. You get how strong the composition of the animation is when you get the teaser at the end of the credits. That's just the rooftop, and you have the windmills and just the sky. Like their use of color is so strong, and like them being able to use really solid colors at times to like really great minimalist effect, and then also having, like in the Kyoto scene, some like really complex shades. It's almost like watercolor or something, where it's like really visually dynamic. It's like their ability to command both of those styles is really impressive. But it is, for me, when they go for that super minimalist aesthetic like that like brief rooftop stinger.
Let's talk about that for a second.
Fuck, man.
Each of the Persona 3 movies has ended with a teaser for the next one.
Yeah.
And I think movie 1 ended with Aigis waking up.
Yeah.
Movie 2, what's the ending of that?
I actually turned off the credits before I got to that point.
I think it's something with the bridge or something.
Something like that, yeah. I think it might have been something with Pharos, I don't remember.
Yeah. But they're bigger. They're like little scenes, like little tiny 1-minute vignettes.
Yeah, that are like a little like thing that's it's almost kind of like the stinger to like a Marvel movie where it's like a little tip of your hat. It's like, oh, hey, this is that character that's going to be in the next movie.
And then it'll say, Persona 3 the movie number 2 is coming soon,
Yeah.
and blah, blah, blah. This one is just, they fade in on the roof, there's no one on it, and the windmills are just churning a little bit. And then it fades in Persona 3 the movie, last episode, not even a coming soon, and then fades out.
Yeah, it just like holds on that for like a minute.
Good God.
That was a mic drop moment. Like, because I was so curious about what the stinger was going to be, and when it faded in on that rooftop, I was like, you guys completely understand how the story in that game worked, and like where the people who played it, where their emotional attachment is. And it's like, it is amazing how unbelievably evocative that is for someone who's a huge fan of that game. Just seeing that rooftop, and then just like, especially how like where it's placed and how it's framed, you're just like, fuck you. Like, how are you trying to make me cry with a fucking post-credit stinger, you assholes? Holy shit.
It's literally breathtaking.
Yeah.
Like, literally your breath catches in your throat for a moment.
Yeah. when you realize that like that's what they're doing with it, that it's not going to be like a single piece of dialogue or something. It's not going to be like Nick's coming out from like the sky or something. It's like, nope, it's just the rooftop, man. Because I think that's one of the things that this movie gets is that that's what the game is about, and it's why like even though it feels like this movie kind of fumbles the Akutsuki scene a little bit, that's totally fine because that's not what the game is about, and it's not what the movie is about. It's like that's stuff that needs to happen to get the plot to move forward, and it's fine if it's just a little bit messy because it's so much more about like that rooftop and it's about like that blue sky. It is not about like the big betrayal or anything like that, you know?
Yeah. And it's funny, you know, before these movies started coming out, my big question was, all right, you can probably do the characters and the story and have it all be good and fun, but how can you do the ending and make it anywhere near as powerful because it's so reliant on you having spent 60 to 80 hours in this world and having the experiential element. And yet we're at a point where I don't think it's going to necessarily match that, but it's going to make us fucking cry.
Yeah.
And that's enough. Like, it's going to hurt really, really bad when you get to that ending. It's going to have all those emotions it needs to have. And that is the miracle. Because how you adapt that's what adaptation is getting to the same emotions by way of a different path. And they're doing that.
Yeah. And it's going to be so... It's going to hurt in such a strange way, too, because you already have the version from the game, but, like, you didn't have this character in the game. Like, they've made this character, and it's like... And again, it's what I said about, like, this movie feeling so tragic in so many of these scenes that, like, is, like, contingent on knowledge outside of the movie itself, where it's like, you know, it's like you're just making this character happy again. It's like, you know all the shit that has to happen later. Like, you know that the friendship with Ryoji is not going to work out, and you know that he's not going to make out of it okay, and you, like, making me care so much for this protagonist. It's like, it's kind of like a big fuck you, because we all already know what happens to him in the end.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. And I cannot fucking wait.
Yeah, I really want to see that last movie.
It came out, I just checked, end of January in Japan. So I assume it'll be out by the end of the year on Blu-ray.
That'd be cool.
It's usually been less than a 12-month window, so I think we'll have it maybe even this summer, and that would be great. But because I think movie 3 might have taken a little extra to get on Blu-ray as well.
Yeah, I feel like it.
But we have it. We'll have 4. I will have spent $320 when this is all over, and worth every penny. This has been a great series so far. Love having these Blu-rays because even if random ones will show up on Netflix, it's just nice to have the physical package on my shelf next to my Persona 4 the animation DVDs. Persona will make you spend money.
Yeah.
What, Sean, what are we making and earning money for in this life if not Persona merchandise?
It's a very fair point because, I mean, I did buy the super extra special version of Dancing All Night, so I understand. I understand. That soundtrack is a really attractive offer.
It is. God, that alone was worth the price.
Yeah.
It's phenomenal.
Well, I think this podcast needs to come to an end at some point.
It does. I'm really sad that we only have one more of these to talk about because this is one of my favorite kind of now annual traditions on the podcast.
Yeah, it's like it's been a nice event that we get to come back to every now and then, and it's been really fun watching these movies. And, you know, more than anything else, Jonathan, I'm excited for a year from now when we get to watch Persona 3, the movie number 4, and we just get to cry together on this podcast, and that's all it's going to be. 3 hours of us just weeping into the microphone.